right, we're going to stop. We are going to stop and listen. Okay. Talking about Little Bighorn, you'll find it. I will have it. It's just a handout, and then you'll have some questions. Okay. It's named Little Bighorn after the Little Bighorn River. Okay. It's not named Little Bighorn because it was just a little massacre. Okay. That wasn't why. Okay. It's named after the Little Bighorn River in Montana. That's where the name comes from. Okay. So don't get all silly. Okay. This is. We're going to start talking about Vietnam eventually, and this battle right here reminds me of the first battle that the Americans engaged in. The first time we actually engaged in battle with North Korea. No, I'm sorry, North Vietnam, not North Korea. With North Vietnam, we were outnumbered something like 5,000 to 500. Okay, because our intelligence had underestimated the enemy's numbers. Okay, but because the guy in charge, a guy named Hal Moore, was a history guy. He loved history. He had studied all the major battles throughout history, and he was one step ahead of the North Vietnamese. Every time they would try to flank him, he'd already had people ready to defend it. Okay. So, and because of that, now he lost people, don't misunderstand, but because of that, the Americans actually won that battle.
Dang.
Okay, but we'll talk more. We'll talk more about that later. Okay, this is one of the battles that he actually studied. Okay,
A lot of generals that went to Vietnam actually studied this.
Yep, actually studied. Okay, so this is a very important battle in history. It didn't turn out well for Custer and his men, but this is a very important battle that leads forward to other studying the battles for military personnel. Okay, all right. Talks about the Battle of Little Bighorn is a legendary battle fought between the U.S. Army and an alliance of Indian tribes. It is also known as Custer's Last Stand. The battle took place over a 2-day period from June 25th through June 26th in 1876. Okay. Now, an alliance. Everybody know what an alliance is, right? That's where they come. Yeah, they came together.
Team up.
Yeah, and that was kind of a rarity, to be honest with you, because a lot of these bigger Indian tribes, they warred against themselves. You know, between themselves, they would have wars.
But they come together and then this time.
Yeah, and so they didn't come together very often to fight the common enemy. If they had, the outcome probably would not have been any different in the end, but they would have probably prolonged it a little bit. But because they couldn't always get along between the tribes, they didn't team up very often. But this is one of the times they did. Very successful. Okay, very, very successful.
I wonder if the Indians cleaned up a little bit more, we would be so much different.
No, I think he wants to know if they had teamed up a little bit more with the outcome. The outcome would have probably ended up being the same in the long run. They might have been able to
hold it for a little bit longer.
But their unfortunately their way of life was fixing to change drastically forever, no matter what. Okay. The U.S. Army was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel George Custer. Now, he is known as General Custer, which I have never figured out, to be honest with you, because a lieutenant colonel is not even the next, general is not even the next step. Okay, lieutenant colonel, the next step is full bird colonel, and then a general. So, but he was known as General Custer. And then he had Major Marcus Reno. And both of these guys had been through the Civil War. I mean, they were veterans. They had been in combat. And they led around 650 soldiers. I'll see you, Caleb. What?
Okay, so I think this is really funny, but one of the chief's tribe members was named Lame White Man.
Yep, he was. And we're going to get there
I
eventually.
mean, why would an Indian
Caleb,
chief we're gonna get there and talk about it.
All right. Yep, but he's right. The tribes were led by several famous chiefs, including Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, Chief Gull, Lame White Man. Why they named him that, I have no idea. Okay, and Two Moons. Okay, or Two Moons. The tribes included the Lakota, Dakotas, Cheyenne, and the Arapaho. Okay, their combined forces they estimate was somewhere around 2,500, although that number has varied. Some things it was less, some things it was probably a whole lot more. Okay, I'm siding with the whole lot more. To be honest with you, I think there was quite a few more than 2,500. How did the battle get its name? Okay, the battle was fought near the banks of the Little Bighorn River in Montana. And the battle is also called Custer's Last Stand for obvious reasons, okay? Because rather than retreat, Custer and his men stood their ground, and eventually, of course, they were overwhelmed, and Custer and all of his men were killed.
Okay.
Now, this makes it sound like, Custer they really put up this great fight. The truth of the matter is they made some tactical errors. First of all, they split the troops up.
Which the Indians knew
Which
that.
they knew, and they were trying to attack this, what they thought was just basically a post with the Indians.
I got it.
Go ahead, what you got?
There was a big hill, and there on the bottom, and all of the men and other generals, like, their camp is overwhelming big, like, because spies had went out and saw it, like, it's way too big, like, you're gonna die.
Yep.
He was like, it's not that big, and he came up over the hill, and it was just a massive, massive, massive camp, and that's when the Indians showed up then.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah, they, some technical errors, they underestimated the numbers, got led right into, to try to attack
at the bottom of the hill.
at the bottom of the hill, and then were surrounded, because the Native Americans had laid out a pretty good plan. Major Reno actually goes in first with quite a few guys. They attack first and are driven out, and they fight their way out, and they actually retreat, make a run for it, and some of them actually survive. Okay, Custer keeps around 210 men is with him, and Custer doesn't retreat. Okay, and I say he didn't retreat, probably couldn't. By this point in time, they have pretty much got him surrounded. There's nowhere to go. Okay, so he's fighting to the death, and that's pretty basically it. And what leads up to this, though, is in 1868, the U.S. government signed a treaty with the Lakota people, guaranteeing them a portion of land in the South Dakota, including the Black Hills. And of course, a few years later, gold was discovered on the Black Hills. And prospectors began to trespass onto the Dakota's land. And soon the United States decides, well, if there's gold there, that's too valuable for those people to be living on. We want it back. Okay? And the Native Americans were not real happy about that. So they were attacking the prospectors and the people that was coming across the land, and that kind of gets everything. Emotions are running really high here, and the government has ordered them off. They're not going to leave, so they send in troops to remove them. Is what's going on here. Yes.
Literally every time the Indians move, it's like almost always because of gold, and like they keep having to move, and like why don't like if they didn't want them to move or they wanted somewhere, they could have just looked out and they could have like went and searched to see which areas had gold in that.
Well, I think it was just, I don't know. I don't know why they did. We did. Unfortunately, it was an unbelievable number of treaties that had been signed over the years with the Native Americans. and the government broke them because of one thing or another, gold being discovered or land was more valuable than they thought. They do end up, and we're going to talk tomorrow about the Trail of Tears. They do end up putting them on reservations throughout Arizona, Oklahoma. We have the Cherokee Reservation out in the mountains of North Carolina. Now, they do not, today's Native Americans do not have to live on the reservation. Some of them chooses to still to live on the reservation, but they don't have to. If you get out in the mountains of North Carolina,
There's a big one
yeah,
where you can visit.
you'll see Native, Cherokee Indians working. They're just out working. They're just normal. It's almost like they're normal people or something. Just get up every day and go to work, and they go to school, and so. Yeah, they're not kept on reservations like that. And at one point in time, they were pretty much kept on the reservations through the late 1800s and all of that. So yeah, they didn't have a lot of choices. But that of course has changed. Okay. When the Indians refused to give up the land, the U.S. decides to force the Indian tribes out of the Black Hills. An army was sent to attack any Indian villages, remaining tribes in the region. And at one point, the army heard of a fairly large gathering of tribes near the Little Bighorn River, and General Custer and his men were sent to attack the group in order to keep them from escaping. Okay? That didn't work out too well. When Custer encountered the large village of Locoya and Cheyenne near the river at the bottom of the valley, he initially wanted to wait and scout the village. However, once the people of the village discovered the presence of the army, he decided he needed to act quickly and attack. Even though he realizes he's outnumbered, at that point in time, that would have been the time if he was going to make a run for it. That would have been the time to do it. He chose to stay and attack. He had no idea how many warriors he was up against because they did camouflage the numbers well. It's not like they had all 2,500 of them standing there, waiting for him, egging him on or something. They were spread out. So
They already knew they were coming.
yeah, he had no idea how many he was actually up against. He thought it was just a few hundred warriors. Turns out to be thousands. And like I said, he has split his army up. He has split his men up. Major Reno began the attack from the south. But as he and his men approached and opened fire, they are quickly overwhelmed with warriors. And Reno decides the best thing to do is make a run for it. So they retreat, okay? And as a military man, retreat is tough because that's not one of the things that they inbreed in you as they're trying to train you. It's always attack, attack, attack. Sometimes common sense has to come into play, and you've got to understand the best thing to do is to retreat, regroup, live to fight another day. And that's kind of what Reno did. So they retreated into the hills, and some of them eventually escaped and were actually saved when the reinforcements showed up, because more troops are on the way. They laid dollars short for Custer, but they are on the way. Okay? The fate of the soldiers with Custer, though, is a little bit less clear because none of them survived. Okay? At some point, Custer engaged the Indians from the north. However, his small army was overwhelmed by the much larger Indian force. After some fierce fighting, Custer actually he and about 50 guys tries to get to high ground. If you're in a battle, if you can find high ground, you always want to take the high ground. That's the first thing they teach you in combat school. You always want to be on the high ground. It's easier. Make your enemy attack uphill. It's harder to attack uphill. You can see more from high ground. Obviously, you can see farther if you're on top of a hill than you can if you're at the bottom of the hill. Okay. Yes.
Did you ever have to attack up the hill, like were the Vietnamese ever on a hill and you had to attack up the
Oh,
hill?
yeah, I mean, it happens, and you don't, to be honest with you, you don't even think about it. at the
You
time.
just go, you
You
go.
don't think about it, yeah.
Just run around naked. Sometimes back in the old days, if you were caught retreating from battle, your own men would kill you. Like during the Battle of
No,
Stalingrad.
that's if you're a coward and you're running. If you're just
not
trying to
retreat.
escape from fighting. There's a difference in running from battle and the army pulling back and retreating.
Yeah, but sometimes if you're running from battle, they would just kill you. No, they wouldn't.
Yeah, in the one battle they did.
Yeah, they did. All right, so Custer ends up on a small hill with about 50 of his men. It was on this hill that he makes his last stand. Okay, he is surrounded by thousands of warriors, little hope to survive, and he and all of the men that stayed with him are indeed killed. Okay, there is no survivors. Okay, all 210 men who remained with Custer were killed. The main force of the U.S. Army eventually arrives, and some of the men under Major Reno's command were saved. Although the battle was a great victory for the Indian tribes, more U.S. forces continues to arrive, and the tribes were eventually, of course, forced out of the Black Hills. Okay?
After they won that war.
Hey, you win a battle, it doesn't mean you're going to win the war. Okay? All right. Interesting facts about Little Bighorn. The Lacola Indians called the fight the Battle of the Greasy Grass.
Greasy grass.
Greasy grass. They had too much condition.
The battle was part of a larger war between the Sioux Nation and the United States called the Great Sioux War of 1876. Sitting Bull had a vision before the battle. He was a famous
Big.
medicine man. He had a vision before the battle, and he saw a great victory over the U.S. Army.
Oh, I'm sure.
Okay, so he has a vision. He sees it. He predicts it that they are going to win this battle. The battle has been a subject of many TV movies and TV shows. Several of Custer's relatives were also killed in the battle, including 2 brothers, a nephew, and his brother-in-law. So his family took a pretty serious hit also, not just him. Now, there was one survivor.
Oh, I was about to say that.
There was one survivor with Custer. Okay?
It was a horse.
Yeah. Anybody? It was a horse. Yeah.
The name was like Kichana.
Comanche.
Comanche.
Yep. Yep. The name of the horse was Comanche.
They killed all the
It was
horses,
actually named, yeah, because none of the other, I mean, everything, if it was living, it was killed, except for this one horse. And he had a number of arrows in him. He had been shot a number of times. But when the other troops arrived and they find this massacre, they find this one horse is alive. And they take him, they actually get him back to the fort, and
He died.
the vet take care of him. He actually survives, but he has never ridden again. Okay, they retire him,
Oh yeah.
and he has never ridden by another soldier. Now they will use him. They do use him during ceremonies and parades and things, military parades and things like that. They will saddle him up, but someone would lead him. No one ever got on his back again. Okay, and what he represented, all the men that had indeed been killed in combat is what he represented. Okay, so that was pretty cool.
When did he die?
He died. I mean, it's a few years later he died, but he just dies a peaceful death, if you would.